And there we are. Recording is in progress. I'm also going to share the screen. And here we go. Number 45. It's up. There we are.
Yes.
Okay. Success. Hatzlocha Rabba. Okay. So World of Responsa 45. You'll be doing some reading tonight, whoever's comfortable in English. All right, until we get to the Hebrew. Not sure I have any modern Hebrew for you, Michael, but there we are. Yeah, I think
Thank
that
you.
you've gotten used to that by now, but you do have Latin. So let's begin on line 6. Michael, do you want to read out the Latin?
Dramatics persona.
Exactly, wonderful. Okay.
Rabbi Yaakov Berav was born in Maqueda near Toledo, Castilian Spain in 1474. He later became a pupil of Rav Yitzchak Abuhav of Castile.
Okay,
After the,
wow. All right. I thought you said you didn't want to read English.
I try my best.
It's almost Shakespearean. So let's say a little bit about what happened here. Rabbi Yaakov Berav, who is the instigator of the Smicha in Sfat, studied under Rabbi Yitzchak Abuhav of Castile, who's called Hagaon mi Castile. He was around at the time of the expulsion from Spain. Okay, so we're talking about being born. He was born in 1433, and he died in 1493, which is a year after the expulsion. So he moved with the Spanish Jews from Spain to Portugal. He was a student of Rabbi Yosef of Toledo, but amongst his students was Rabbi Yitzchak Campanton, who's very famous for his book on how to learn Gemara. And he also taught Avraham Zakuto. What did Avraham Zakuto invent?
Invent, astronomical, je sais pas,
The astrolabe.
astrolabe.
Exactly. And who used Zakuto's astrolabe? Christopher Columbus. It hadn't been for Jewish brains, Columbus would never have gotten to the New World. Same story. And who is celebrated? Well, he does have, Zakuto has a crater on the moon named after him. You can check it out. I think it's either the Zakuto crater or the Rabbi Abraham crater, but he does at least have a crater on the moon. But had it not been for the astrolabe, which he actually found a way of keeping it accurate, even though you were on a ship that was really being tossed around on high seas, you have to have something that makes the measurements reliable. And he basically constructed an extremely successful astrolabe. Vasco da Gama also used his astrolabe, as did Amerigo di Vespucci, who got America named after him. So, outstanding Talmid Chacham, and he taught in Portugal. Those students who came from Spain, but he died in 1493, before 1495, when King Manuel, who when he was shidduched off with the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, paid the price of getting rid of his Jews, which he didn't do. He simply baptized them by force. And we remember that story. The story is going to accompany us right through this whole discussion of the halakha of smicha, the specter of Spain and Portugal, and the Marranos. Persecution is always hanging over us like a sword of Damocles. So, after the expulsion, Michael, please continue.
After the expulsion of Jews from Spain, he fled to Fez in Abbasid-ruled Morocco.
Now, I won't bore you with the details of the Wattasids, but for a short time, they were a fairly liberal Islamic regime, and Morocco was in their fiefdom. And so Yaakov Berav was able to settle down for a while in Fez in Morocco. The Fez Jewish community.
The Fez Jewish community, consisting of 5,000 households, chose him for their rabbi, though he was but a youth of 18.
In other words, quite remarkable. And here in the Kuntras Hasmicha, which we find at the end of the Shut Mar al-Bach, he has the following to say about himself. Jean, would you like to read? Tehillah La'el, line 11.
תהילה לאל מיום הגירוש וההשמץ שבספרד, לעולם הייתי מורה הוראות ורב ל5,000 בתים יהודיים במדינת פס כמפורסם לכל העולם.
So Rabbi Yaakov Erav is not to be accused of false modesty. In fact, he may have exaggerated. Unlikely that there were 5,000 houses, families there, probably a lot less, but still, it's not bad. And he does say, though, that he never, ever changed his path in life. He was always devoted to Torah, its study, and its teaching. V'hayiti az, if you can
בן
continue.
18 שנים, ועדיין לא הייתי בחתימת זקן.
What did he not have when he was 18? Didn't even have a beard. And he still got to be the rabbi, 5,000 families, and says, okay.
והיו שם חכמים גדולים.
And don't think that they were an ignorant bunch. No, 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 no. I was the rabbi of, as they say in Yiddish, a kehillah von Eisene Kep. They were people who were Talmidei Chachamim, and they could take me on, but nobody bested me. Im heyoti.
ואם היותי ברעב ובצמא ובחוסר כל, לעולם הלכתי כדרכי השם יתברך, בדרכי השם יתברך, ונתעסקתי בתורתו.
Now, what is he hinting there? Although he was a penniless refugee, as they were, he never stopped walking in the ways of God. What do you think that means? What's he hinting at there?
Dat Marelbach had conversion, forced
He
conversion.
never apostatized. Exactly. You've preceded me, Jean, but that's fine. He never apostatized. No matter what happened, he remained true to the faith. Okay, and that's, we'll see, comes up again. Okay, Shmuley, I think you're on. He eventually left Fez.
He eventually left Fez for Tlemcen.
Tlemcen. Where is Tlemcen? In Algiers.
Near
And
to the border.
Evidence of the great respect there paid him is afforded by the following lines of Avraham Gavison, quoted by his son of Yaakov Gavison in his Omer
Hashikha. That's connected with Rut and Shavuot. Omer Shikha, the forgotten sheaf. Okay, published in Livorno in the 18th century. Gavison, by the way, was a family of Algerian rabbis. Avraham Gavison has a shul. Oh, okay, forget that. That's actually Abohav. But Avraham Gavison he went to Tlemcen because he was the body physician to the king of Algiers. Has anybody heard of Ruti Gavison, the late professor of law at the Hebrew University, who together with which rabbi wrote a potential constitution for a Yaakov Meidan? She got together with Yaakov Meidan, and they wrote a possible constitution for the state of Israel, which would combine Yahadut and Democratia. She was very well known, brilliant. She did her PhD, by the way, with HLA Hart in Oxford. So she spent some time in Oxford, and probably his most brilliant student. Both Debbie and I attended her seminars at the Hebrew University, and she was indeed intellectually lively, to say the least. You came out of her seminars absolutely exhausted. The funny thing is that she, in fact, is a descendant of a rabbinical family from Algiers, and somebody once let it slip that Ruth Gavison, professor of law at the Hebrew University, identified with the left wing, with secular approach. I hear from the voice on my left, she was head of the civil rights movement. Somebody once let it slip that she was a Moroccan. And one of the Moroccan media personalities sort of responded with a huge guffaw and said she may have had some Moroccan ancestry, but Ruth Gavison was certainly not a Moroccite. She was certainly not a Moroccan by any means. However, this is her ancestry, and sometimes you wonder when the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. She, of all of the left wing and all of the Hebrew University intellectuals who were backing human rights and were very close to some of the philosophy of Aaron Barak, by the way, she was not. And she was cancelled by Barak. She was a leading candidate for the Supreme Court. Barak cancelled her, partly because she said things like, you know what, perhaps we should listen to reasonable Sephardi rabbis like Ovad Yosef in his prime, and perhaps we should try and do something to unify. And she had no patience for lesser intellects, is what I'm being told by the voice on my left. The charge leveled against her was lack of judicial temperament. And one suspects that lack of judicial temperament at that time meant anybody who disagreed with Barak. However, I leave that to you. It happened, it's in the past. And there we are. So you never know. But the Gavisons were a line of Algerian rabbis. And in the Omer HaShichacha, we have the following line translated from Spanish poetry by Cecil Roth. It's all very nice. So he did this in English, but it actually rhymes. Shmuley, do you want to give us the rhyme? Here we're talking about Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, okay? Now, what does Gavison have to say?
Say not that the lamp of the law no longer in Israel burneth. Yaakov Beirav hath come back, once more among us he sojourneth.
So you noticed the poetry there. Okay, very nice. But the Omer Shichacha has got a lot of poetry. It's also got the history of the Gavison family fleeing from Spain, as they all did, finding refuge in North Africa. And they were thrilled that Yaakov Beirav moved from Fez to Tlemcen, where Rabbi Avraham Gavison had been the body physician of the king. From Tlemcen,
he traveled to somebody else.
No,
He traveled.
That's another
He
line.
traveled to Algiers, where he copied numerous responsa of the Tashbets, many of which are quoted by Rabbi Yosef Karo in his Bes Yosef.
As I said, Tlemcen is actually on the border of Morocco and Algiers, but the Tashbets we learnt about. He was the rabbi of Algiers after having fled there from Majorca after the original Spanish persecution of 1391, and he copied the Chuvot of the Tashbets. And Rabbi Yosef Karo's Bet Yosef quotes the Tashbets often because he got the manuscripts, all copied by hand, from his teacher Rabbi Yaakov Beirav in Tzfat. Okay, now let's read on. David Parks, would you like to take us, please, from line 20 in 1513?
In 1513, he sat on the Cairo Beth Din, but left for Jerusalem in 1516, where he established a yeshiva. There, however, the social and economic conditions were so oppressive that he did not stay long, but returned with his pupils to Egypt, where he taught Torah, earned a living from the raisin business, and became a wealthy man.
Okay, this is a story of Golos Jews right through, okay? And by the way, it also means that coming to Israel was really tough. Israel, Jerusalem, the whole of the place. I'm not going to rehearse now the history of all of the different Mohammedan and Turkish and Mamluk and different authorities and kings and knights and people who tried to establish, and they made life miserable for the inhabitants of the holy cities, and they just wanted to tax them to death more or less. But it was always tough. And here you see that these rabbis, they didn't have an easy time, okay, by any means. But he made money, very smart man, Yaakov Beirav, and he became very wealthy. And then we find him later, several years later, please, David, he was living like
several years later, he was living in Damascus. In 1535, he settled in Tzfat, which at the time was the largest Jewish community in Ottoman Syria. His yeshiva attracted the cream of the rabbinical luminaries in a city of great scholars, the most prominent of whom were Rabbi Joseph Caro and the Mabit. He died in Sfat
Moshe ben Yosef Trani, we'll talk about him when we get there. Okay, but we've all heard of Caro and the Mabit. He died in
Sfat in 1546, and his grave is in the old Sfat cemetery.
Okay, so let's read on, and now we go to Yitz, please. Line 28 in 1538.
In 1538, Rav Beirav formulated the bold idea which made him famous, namely that of reintroducing authentic smicha, which would have made possible the re-establishment of the Sanhedrin with the authority to administer official malkot.
Remember, they wanted malkot so they could atone for the sins they'd all committed whilst fleeing for their lives and having to undergo forced baptism and forced apostasy. He assembled
25 prominent Sfat rabbis, and they ordained him using the traditional formula.
It didn't need that laying of the hands, as we learned. They just had to say you're a rabbi and you are qualified to dan dinei knasot and etc. On hearing of the event,
most of the Jewish scholars in Tzfat expressed their agreement, and the few who discountenanced the innovation lacked the courage to oppose Rav Beirav and his illustrious following.
In other words, in Tzfat in those days, if you had Beirav and Caro and the Mabit and a few more, it wasn't worthwhile even trying. Rabbi Beirav.
Rav Beirav then ordained Rav Levi ben Chaviv of Jerusalem, Mahar al-Bach, in a flattering and flowery document.
Now, they were in Tzfat. The Mahar al-Bach, Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv, was in Jerusalem. They discussed and formulated the smicha plan, no record of his having been involved. But the first thing they did after having decided that the new masmich of original smicha would be Rabbi Yaakov Beirav was to send a very lovely and decorated tzfat. You go there today, you'll be able to buy nice Jewish art, hasn't changed, a wonderful and flowery and well-decorated smicha certificate to the Rabbi of Jerusalem. Mahar
al-Bach had not been involved in any of the discussions, but as the most eminent rabbi in the Holy City at the time and an expert on the Jewish calendar, it was important to have him on board in order to make the smicha enterprise a viable one. Rav Beirav then awarded smicha to his outstanding disciples, Rav Yosef Karo and the Mabit, and two others.
Now the record is not clear. We don't know who. We know there were four. We don't know who the other two were. So we have two suggestions in the literature. One was either Rabbi
Moshe Cordovero, Ramak, or Rav Yosef Sagis, or Rabbi Avraham Shalom and Rabbi Yisrael de Curiel.
You can read all about them. Chat GPT. The Ramak we might talk about. He's a very important figure in the development of Kabbalah. Rabbi Caro later ordained
Rav Moshe Alshich, who in turn ordained Rav Chaim Vital in 1569.
Who was Rabbi Chaim Vital? What is he famous for?
Commentary on the
Jean, he was?
Commentary on the Zohar?
Well, he actually he wrote down the Kabbalah of the Ari. The Ari left nothing in writing. His main Talmud was Rabbi Chaim Vital, head of what they call Gurei HaAri. The Ari is the lion, the Gurim are the cubs. There was a whole group of Kabbalists in Tzfat called the Lions Cubs, and they were led by Rabbi Chaim Vital, and he basically wrote down a coherent description of the revolutionary teachings of the Ari HaKadosh. So that was in 1569, he was ordained, and after that, Yitz, can you conclude, please?
After that, the new smicha virtually died out.
Okay, so this is, in a nutshell, the story of Rabbi Yaakov Beirav. Who is the other member of the dramatis personae? Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv, the Mahar al-Bach, in 1480 to 1541. Okay, who'd like to take up the reading now? Yonat, do you want to read something in English?
Okay, Rabbi Levi Chaviv Temaralbach was born in Zamora, Spain. His father was Rabbi Yaakov ben Chaviva, famous
חביב,
for
לא חביבה.
Chaviva,
Chaviva.
Chaviva. Jean will go for Chaviva. You can go for Chaviv if you like, but I think it's in the academic world, Chaviva. Famous for his Ein
For his
Yaakov.
Yaakov
Now,
and
oh, just a second. Have you heard of the Ein Yaakov? You're not.
Yaakov.
The Ein Yaakov.
Yeah,
Very famous.
it is
Stories from the Talmud.
All the Gadotot.
It's all the stories, all their bits of stories in the Talmud gathered together in Ein Yaakov, became very popular indeed all over Europe, Eastern Europe especially. Halakha was often a bit taxing and a bit much and a bit hard, but the stories in the Talmud are delightful. Some of them are horrific, but they're stories. Stories are always easier to sell to a group of hardworking people at the end of the day after Mariv than a dense discussion of a halakhic topic. Ein Yaakov became popular. There were chugim for Ein Yaakov all over Eastern Europe. It became one of the most beloved books, okay? And was written by Rabbi Yaakov ben Chaviva, who was the father of Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv, okay? So, Ein Yaakov, I mean, who hasn't heard of Ein Yaakov? And the voice on my left reminded me that in Melbourne, Australia, a rabbi of the shul we attended when we were there, the very nice man from Eastern Europe, and he would regularly teach Ein Yaakov. Didn't give a Gemara shiur, and as I'm told, as far as he was concerned, it was Ein Yankiv, not Ein Yaakov. But there we are. Times have changed. Okay, another couple of lines, please, Yonat. The family fled.
among his ancestors was Rabbi Yosef,
Chaviva.
author of the Nimukei Yosef on the Reef.
Now, here we are actually in the aristocracy of Talmud commentary. Whoever learns the Rif on the Gemara, right, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, will find on the same page the commentary, the Nimukei Yosef. Now, here we have a real heavy-hitting Talmudic scholar. So, Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv Amar Rabach has got Yiches galore, okay? The Nimukei Yosef. So I'm not going to give you a whole rundown on the Nimukei Yosef, but let's have one more line, please, Jonathan. The family fled.
Family fled to Portugal after the expulsion, and he studied with his father and with Rabbi Yitzchak Aboav of Castile.
The same Gaon of Castile with whom Rabbi Yaakov Beirav also learned. By the way, do not confuse Rabbi Yitzchak Aboav of Castile, who lived in the 15th century, with Rabbi Yitzchak Aboav in the 14th century, who wrote which famous book?
Menorat HaMaor.
Thank you, Jean. Comme toujours, okay. Un vrai érudit. The Menorat HaMaor is a very famous book. It's a wonderful book of Musar and Drashot and also Halakha. Yitzchak Aboav the first, sometimes called Yitzchak Aboav Hazaken. Menorat HaMaor, the candelabrum of light, because it's divided up into 7 sections. Don't confuse the two. This is a different Yitzchak Aboav. Okay, let's see. Now we're on to you. Ian, are you still there? Ian, in London.
I can continue.
Apparently
He's still in London.
So let's see. I have Yael Berman. Is Yael Berman there? It's a bit like Eurovision. Yeah. Yael Berman, are you hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
He also developed. Let's have you read a bit, please.
Line
10.
Line 10. He also developed expertise in mathematics and astronomy. Whilst in Portugal, he was forcibly baptized, but a year later, he managed to escape to Salonika and rejoin his family. He became a well-respected Rosh Yeshiva, and amongst his disciples were the
Maharashtra.
Maharashtra.
The famous Rabbi Shmuel di Medina, who we read about in the shiur on the will, on the estate of Donna Grazia, rabbi appointed by Donna Grazia to be the head of rabbinical seminary in Salonika, and again one of the very famous Meshivim of the time, and Rabbi Jacob Castro. Nothing to do with the women's clothing store. He also helped.
He also helped publish his father's Ein Yaakov. In 1525, he went to live in Jerusalem and was quickly acknowledged.
Partly because he felt he had to do tshuva for his false baptism. So he went to, even though Tzfat was really the place to be, and Jerusalem at that time was an absolute backwater, and there were plagues and persecution, but he wanted to be in Yerushalayim, somehow to redeem himself for that year when he had to live as a crypto Jew, as a Christian in order to survive. Was quickly acknowledged.
And was quickly acknowledged as the city's most outstanding scholar.
There were very few scholars in Jerusalem at the time. It was all in Tzfat. He wrote
Responsa Maharalabach,
including
Kuntras HaSmicha and Pirush Kiddush HaChodesh, a detailed commentary. A detailed commentary on Maimonides' Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh.
Like many Spaniards, he was an expert in astronomy, mathematics. Remember, Abraham Zacuto actually lectured on astronomy at the University of Salamanca. Okay, he was allowed to stay, and eventually he made his way out. But the Jewish contribution to mathematics and astronomy at the time was huge, as all will bear out. But let's have a look at the dispute between Rabbi Beirav and the Maharalbach. So I'm going back up, and whoops, I want a full screen. What happened here? Something happened to my screen.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Go down again.
No.
You can't see it. Doesn't mean they can't.
No, it's not, because it is.
Yes, you're too far.
There. Okay. I am
Back.
I am back. The dispute
Yeah,
between line 20.
that's it.
Line 20. Shmuley, I'm in English, so I'm back with you. Maharalbach
did not react positively to his newly minted Safad Smicha. Although claiming that he had initially been sympathetic to Rabbi Rav's proposal, he was clearly deeply upset by the fact that he had not been involved in the discussions which had led up to the Smicha project, and that, as Jerusalem's main rabbi, his opinion had not been the dominant one.
In other words, here we have a fight over turf. There may have been a good idea, reintroduce smicha, help all of those Spanish refugees do tshuva, also perhaps bring about some unity for the Jewish people. But if you tread on somebody's toes, then you're likely to be in trouble. And Rav's personality and the Maharalbach's personality, well, read on, please. He was also highly
miffed by the fact.
Everybody know what miffed means? Upset, okay? Ani metargem mehalaz. Miffed is upset by the fact
that the Sfat rabbis clearly did not value his scholarship sufficiently highly.
They didn't consult. They did what they did. They said, look, we have Kol Chachamei Hador here in Sfat, and we're going to, of course, give him a smicha, first musmach, but he was clearly marginalized, and he was very miffed by his marginalization. Okay, after studying
the smicha issue for 2 weeks, he sent back a negative answer to Rabbi Rav with a short explanation of his reservations.
And David Parks, would you please take the theme up?
It's 29, is that right?
26.
This was followed by a much longer tract, which he circulated widely. Rabbi Rav responded with his own tract, which included a barbed reference to Maharalbach's involuntary conversion to Christianity, noting that, I never changed my name. In the midst of wanton despair, I went in God's way.
We read that, okay?
Yeah.
The Rabbi Yaakov Rav didn't hold back, and Weiss, he didn't say it outright. He wanted to say, look, you know, you are tainted by the fact that you were forcibly baptized. You stayed, you didn't flee as soon as you could. Unlike me, I got to Morocco in time. You stayed, you became baptized, you had to act as a Christian. I am sorry, that degrades you.
But he
Now-
was a child. He was 12.
And that's why I mean, if you've read the Kuntres HaSmicha, you read the sources, you know that this is exactly what we're going to say. He wasn't a child, he was a young man. In his defense, can we have another line, please, David?
In his defense, Marbach, in a very lengthy reply, frankly admitted they'd been baptized and behaved as a crypto Jew, but pointed out that at the time he was a mere youth, that his voluntary profession of Christianity lasted hardly a year, and that he took his first opportunity to escape and rejoin the religion of his fathers.
Now, I'm not going to go into
It may be
just a second what we discussed at length when we read Rambam's Igrot Hashmad. But we remember that reality is there. You can't deny it. And people wanted to save their lives. And the Rambam wrote to the community that the rabbi who came along and said, you're terrible sinners because you are anusim, you were forced by the Almohadis to say the Shada. Not talking about Christianity, Catholicism, much more serious thing, but just to say the Shada. He said, well, if you take it because you save your life, and we know it's not really sincere. As soon as you can, you leave. You have not committed Chilul Hashem, okay? So the Maral Bach says, look, granted, had I had a chance, perhaps I would have. But all these things are part and parcel of not only my lot. And remember who I am. I didn't come, as we said, from nowhere. I bore the yichus of the Ein Yaakov, the Nimukei Yosef. But like all of us at the time, you perhaps, Beirav, were fortunate. You were able to get out in time and get to Fez. But those of us who didn't, you cannot hold that against me. So, Michael Rosenfeld, would you give us some more Shakespearean English, please? It may be significant.
Significant that during his period in Jerusalem, he and Rav Beirav had numerous disagreements over halachic matters prior to the Smicha dispute.
I'm not going to give examples, but there was not a good relationship. The chemistry between these two men was not good. Maharal Bach went on the offensive.
Maharal Bach went on the offensive, and in addition to his specific Smicha-related halachic arguments, he implied that Rav Beirav lacked the necessary spiritual refinement for being an authentic musmach, since he was more of an innovator than a guardian of tradition.
Now, that's an interesting sentence, but wanted to change things, whereas Maharal Bach wanted to keep things as they were. This is a fight, an ongoing fight in rabbinics between those who want to initiate and innovate, okay, and those who want to keep things as they were. He also accused Rabbi Beirav
of wanting to establish the Sanhedrin in order to introduce innovations into the Jewish calendar.
Now, as we'll see, if you have smicha and a Sanhedrin, then halacha may require you to go back to Kiddush al Pi Ru'iyah, that you will no longer follow the mathematical calendar, but you'll use Jerusalem as a center for calculating the calendar according to the moon. And that is something that nobody actually wanted to do at the time. So the Maharal Bach goes back to his strength, which is Chot Kiddush HaChodesh, in order to accuse Beirav of wanting to change the whole approach to the calendar. Okay? The Smicha controversy
went beyond Sfat and Yerushalayim and involved poskim from various Jewish centers.
As we'll
the inability to arrive at a consensus fated the enterprise to failure, and even Rav Yosef Karo, who was himself a musmach, failed to refer to its existence in his Shulchan Aruch.
And I'll give you just one example from Even HaEzer, Hilchot Ones Umefateh, laws of rape and seduction. So what does the line say? Jean, line 4, Ones Umefateh.
אונס ומפתה דנין אותה בשלושה, דיינים ובלבד שיהיו סמוכים בארץ ישראל, והעידנא שאין סמוכים ונדעינו אותו.
In other words, there used to be knasot, a monetary fine in cases of rape, but Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef says we don't have that anymore because we need smuchim for dinei knasot, for the levying of fines. We need authentic smicha. We don't have it. So ha'idna means today what we do is we simply put the criminal into cherem. Okay, and until such time as he compensates, does tshuva, promises not to repeat the sin, compensates the family for the either the rape or the seduction that he performed. Okay, so that is an interesting clincher there. So following the grant of smicha, let's have a look. Yitz, you're on, please. Line 5. Following the grant of smicha, and you have to unmute. Great.
I'm struggling to. Sorry. Following the grant of the first smichot, 2 informers alerted the local Ottoman authorities as to what was afoot in the Jewish community.
And this always happened for thousands of years in the diaspora. Something's happened in the Jewish community, gets reported to the non-Jewish authorities. They say, the Jews are getting restless. God knows what they're going to do. We have to then repress them. So anything that seemed to indicate that the Jews wanted to become independent, go back to the land of Israel, build a Bet HaMikdash, unleashed a strong and violent reaction. So when the Malshilim, okay, then...
So Rabbi Rav was in danger of being clapped into jail, fomenting rebellion?
Exactly. And his fortune?
And his fortune, which had long been coveted by the authorities, would have been confiscated.
They were always looking for Jewish money to confiscate, okay? Help them out of their financial straits or simply make them rich. He left
Tzfat in a hurry and spent time in Egypt and Damascus. Eventually he returned to Tzfat, but by that time, support for the reintroduction of smicha was waning.
Because if you have your main mover away from the scene, that's always a risk to the enterprise. Ian Taylor, would you give us a little more, please? Line 10, the ultimate collapse.
The ultimate collapse of Rav Berav's initiative is explained by some scholars as being due to the clash between Rav Berav and Maharalbach at a personal level. Others blame it on the rivalry between Tzfat and Yerushalayim. There was also a deeper clash between ideologies. Rav Berav believed that halacha ought to be proactive in order to bring about the redemption, whereas Maharalbach was more conservative and believed that God alone will deal with the redemption.
Remember the redemption aspect. Rambam, Maimonides' main contribution was that we need to have a Sanhedrin before Mashiach comes, because of the pasuk in Yeshayahu, "Va'ashiva shoftaich kivarashna, v'atzaich kivatchila zikarei lecha lach ir tzedek." Okay, whereas the Marabach says, "I don't believe in that. We don't need to be proactive. Leave it all in God's hands. Read on, read on,
and bring it about in His own time."
In the meantime,
God's own time, of course. In the meantime, Jews should serve God in the traditional manner and not seek to make redemption-driven innovations. Echoes of these approaches can be heard throughout Jewish history, up to and even including modern times.
That is our times, the same sort of thing. Okay, good. So now we're going to move on to more close halachic discussion. And we're going to read some of the original texts. Okay, so let's see. We'll begin with Rabbi Yaakov Beirav's announcement. Line 21. Al ken al kol divrei ha'igeret hazot. By the way, where does that line come from? All the words of this letter, where does it come from? Which biblical book? Megillat Esther.
Yeah, Esther.
Okay.
Right.
על כן קראו לימים האלה פורים על שם הפור, על כן על כל דברי האיגרת הזאת, ומה ראו ככה, ומה הגיע עליהם. קמנו ונתעודד. We rose and took confidence. Where does that come from?
המה כשלו ונפלו, ואנחנו קמנו ונתעודד.
בדיוק, it's from
Oh,
תהילים כ'. We said every
שיהיה
morning
דמך.
למנצח. אנחנו קמנו ונתעודד. אנחנו צעירי הצאן, the small ones, very modest, of course, of the flock. And where does that come from? It says a pasuk in Yirmiyah, Zechariah, Asher al admat HaKodesh. We're in the Holy Land, lekaneh al kavod Hashem, to be zealous for the honor of God. Ki ech nashuv el Hashem b'chol levaveinu. How can we do tshuva wholeheartedly without a Sanhedrin that can give us malkot? Amanu ish el achiv, chazak v'nitchazek ba'ad ameinu ba'ad arei Eloheinu. Who said that, by the way, in Tanakh?
יואב.
Very good. Wow. Yoav ben Tzruya, he said exactly that when he's encouraging the forces of King David and Shmuel Bet, Chazak v'nitchazek, ba'ad ameinu uva'ad arei Eloheinu. And all this is a string of psukim, as many rabbinic sources are. V'narim nes haTorah asher hushlach arza. We will raise the banner of the Torah which has been thrown down by Yalimir Mas Chutzot and trampled upon in the courtyards. We have chosen the greatest among us, that refers to the capacity of a Bet Din to revoke Zerot and Takanot, is great in wisdom and in number. The perfect one, Harav Hagadol, Marenu Harav Beirav Naru. Shehaya Samuch v'Rosh Yeshiva v'Rav Yitkerei. He's called the Rav.
שיהיה.
And he's going to take the best of our sages. The Rabbanim Yitkeru, they will be called Rabbanim, v'Yusmuchim. They will have smicha v'yasu emet v'yosher mishpetei Torah ladin et shetakif, and rule with upraised and authoritative hand. V'ayayim bin hakot harasha. What does this pasuk come from? What does it refer to? Giving
משפטים.
V'ayayim bin hakot harasha v'pilu hashofet v'kau lefalav b'mispa. So we get the Malchus here, okay? V'yakeu al pi Torah kasher yuchal se'ito. And as much as the person who's being beaten can bear, he'll be beaten by a fully musmach Sanhedrin and will be able to achieve atonement for the sins, for which karet is the punishment. V'pater miyedei kreto. Look at it, it's written here, black and white. There'll be a pator from his karet. V'itkarev el olam. You can then become close to the high God. Another pasuk, of course, taken from the Torah, when Yitro advises Moshe in the context of the Shoftim, okay, Sarei Asarot, Chamishim, Umeah, and then the whole nation will be able to function well. This is what it was all about in 1538. והיה מעשה הצדקה והשלום הזה תחילה וראש לפדיון נפשנו, לאותנו עטרת תפארת ביד השם וצניף מלוכה ביד אלוהינו, הוא ברחמיו ישרש שכינתו במעשה ידינו, and the God will rest his shechina upon what we do. ויקוים דבר עבדו, והשיבה השופטייך כבראשונה, והצייך כבתחילה, אחרי כן יקרא לך צדק, צדקה נאמנה, אמן ואמן. Now the Mari Beirav goes on to explain in halakhic terms. He cites the Mishnah that kol chayvei kritot shelaku niftaru yedei kretatan. If you were liable karet, but you get malchus, then you will be atoned for, because it says v'nikla achicha leinecha kishelaka harehu ka'achicha. That pasuk in Malkot says v'nikla. There, of course, it means he shall be humiliated by the lashes. But the Mari Beirav says, V'nikla achicha. Once you've had the punishment, you return to being achicha, your brother. Ve'ein lahakshot mima shekatuv barambam perikut chet meilchot sanhedrin gzeret hakatuv shen betin mimiten velo malkin et ha'adam ba'odat pi ve'en le'idim atra. Now, the Mari Beirav raises an issue. When will the Sanhedrin give malkot? When somebody had committed a sin for which there is a penalty of lashes. Every lav in the Torah is potentially fit subject for malkot, but you have to have edim and hatra. For all corporal and capital punishments, you have the witnesses who witness the offense. They answer to a lot of qualifications that we won't go into now, but they also have to administer a warning. If you do this, you will receive such and such a punishment. And we don't have that here. Nobody's reporting what the Marabach did in Portugal, okay? It's all down to what they say and what they want. Okay? So the Rambam says, well, that type of malkot is a punishment for a sin, or it is when you're forcing somebody to do the right thing. For which case do we have of forcing somebody to do the right thing by giving him
of get.
a masarev get, exactly. Kofino, to'ad shome, rotseani. Or makat mardut. Rabbis would give at the times of the Talmud, the lashing, if you were disobedient and thought that was the thing to do. Dilote mahaki lakta midatadin. And then Mari Beirav says, well, you've got to say this because you want to get a just result. Mi shavar avera shechayav aleha karet. V'haya edim atra'a kishuva lifnei beidin v'kafu oto beidin lekabel malkot. Somebody who committed a sin, and there were witnesses, and he was warned. And then he's brought to beidin to receive malkot. V'asat tshuva yipater min ha karet. You do tshuva, then you'll be patur from the karet, because the malkot of the Yisurin that help you get over the karet. But you have to have tshuva. How much more somebody who voluntarily wants to get malkot, there's no question about doing tshuva, shipater min ha karet. Now that
This is not evident.
That argument can easily be attacked, and the Marabach gets in there straight away. He says, Kol chayvei kritot shelaku niftru min dekritatan, v'yalifni mikra dekama v'nikla achicha, kivan shakla harihu achicha. Aval, when is this? Kishi yitru bahem b'shat ha'avera lamalkot. Official malkot needs witnesses and a hatra'ah. ואם אין התראה, אין מלכות על ידי בית דין, ואם המלכות אינו על ידי בית דין, אין פטור מכרת. You want official malkot, it's not going to help you unless you have shnei edim and the hatra'ah. Demai dekamakra v'nikla achicha b'malkot al yedei beit din hu. That's not just anybody giving anybody, like we do malchus today, for those who still do it on Erev Yom Kippur. V'chen katuv b'ferush hilchot harif, and whose great-grandson is of the Nimukei Yosef is writing these words? The Maralbach. And my grandfather wrote in his Nimukei Yosef very clearly that Kol Chayvei Kritot Kretot Im Hutru Bahem Lamalkot Mishum Halava Kadu Bahem V'Laku Nifteru Me Hakaret Atkam. And the Maralbach then goes on. He's on the jugular, so he presses his point home, and he says, in any case, I'm not going to read every single one, just give you the gist. He says, look, tshuva is enough. I can show you that whilst malkot does help, but the main thing is tshuva, and if you don't do tshuva, the malkot won't help, and God knows what's in our hearts. And as he says, tshuva, en davar haomed bifnei hatshuva. Now he, of course, is talking about himself. He doesn't plan to get malkot. He doesn't want to go with this smicha scheme. So what does he say? I mean, he was the sinner here. Clearly, that year in which he spent as a Christian, he committed sins for which karet would be the punishment. What is he saying? Karet is imita b'dei shamayim. It's given by God. Does God understand the weakness of human flesh? Of course. As we say every year at the Yamim Noraim, at the end of Unatan Tokef, what do we say? Emet kiat just not takbot b'mot emet ki b'shuvo midar v'chaya. And he also says, Ata yodea yitzram ki hem basar vadam. Okay? You know they are only flesh and blood. So the Marabach says the much better way of going about this whole guilt thing is not to get a Sanhedrin going of Musmachim, but to believe in the power of tshuva. Clearly, Mari Beirav wanted more than just the administration of Malkut. He sees a fragmented Jewish world after the expulsion from Spain. Many groups, different customs. Sephardim are now scattered all over the Orient, okay? We have customs, we have the Romaniots, we have Ashkenazim. Where is Jewish unity going now? We're all confused. Let's also use the Sanhedrin. Primarily, we're going to offer it as atonement for apostasy and kretot. We can use it to bring about unity, which Beirav wanted to do, okay? And therefore, Rabbi Yosef Karo, his student, writes a Shulchan Aruch for all of Jewry, some code of law. But the Marabach was miffed. He was insulted, and he says, this is not going to work. So he says, Tshuva alone will do the trick. Then the question is, what did the Rambam actually mean when he says in his Mishneh Torah that we need the Haskama of Kol Chachmei Yisrael? So Mari Beirav says, but then he said at the end, if you remember, we need to have a resolution. In other words, it's not that clear. In his Perush La Mishnah, it was much more definitive. But that he wrote when he was younger. In his Mishneh Torah, his code of law, 1188. Well, that has this rider. What does this rider mean, this qualification? This v'adavar tzarich echraya. Shenireh lichura shu kimistapek bazeh. Ein lomar ela shu chozer litchilat halashon. ועוד שאף שנראה לשונו שאם יערער אפילו אחד מחכמי ארץ ישראל אינה מועלת, אותה צמיחה זה אינו, שאם מסכת הראיות מסכינן שבכל התורה כולה רובו ככולו. I won't go into רובו ככולו now, but of course it's a rule over halacha. You have to have a revi'it yayin in your kos for arba kosot. Do you need to drink the whole revi'it? No. Rubo kekulo. And we go through the whole of halacha. Rubo kekulo. Of course, you can't say that a shiur is rubo kekulo because then it isn't a shiur. You have to have a revi'it. So on Pesach night, we sit around the Seder arguing whether we need 86 mils in our cups or 154 mils, and then some will say more or less, but you don't need to drink the whole thing, fortunately, because once you've established that you have the shiur, then rubo kekulo kicks in. So Marabach says, look, the Rambam does add this qualification, but he's only going to the line before, which if you remember was, can you have one musmach who can then co-opt two others, like Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who gave smicha by himself, but with two others presumably at his side, who were not musmachim like him, but he in fact gave them smicha, so they could in turn be masmich, the 5 remaining talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. So if it's that line, then that davar tzarich echreya doesn't apply to the possibility of renewing smicha. And if you say kulam, well, kulam doesn't mean every single one. It means the majority. So I am okay. Marabach says, no, you're not. He says, no, according to my view, the Rambam, well, let's see what he says, because here, I mean, he lets the cat out of the bag. Line 21. Liot galui beinei toratam. You rabbis in Tzfat know. I respect you, but you know. Shehaskamatam zot einena kayamot imo behaskamatenu imam. You need us. Anachnu tzera tzon Yerushalayim. What happened to the Jerusalem flock? You Tzfat flock think you can rule the roost? Certainly not. Shegam shanachnu ma'atei kamut be'erkam. Although we are less, the inhu and you tzfatas are nefishi tuva minan, you're more than us. Toda la'el, thank God. Lav katli kani bagmanan. That's an expression in the Gemara. Jean, will you tell us what it means?
We are not insignificant.
Exactly, very well put. Katli kani ba'agma is people who are mere reed cutters in a swamp. The lowest profession in Babylon, which is in a swamp. Remember in Bavel, where they could make the Levanim, Eretz Shinar, So you went to the swamp and you cut the reeds. You were like, the bottom of the social pile. We're not there. You may be more, but we are still people of quality, as Jean said. We are not insignificant by any means. Milvad kedushat hamakom, and also the holiness of Jerusalem. What happened to you, people in Tzfat? Have you forgotten? Shuhu davar masur lekol chachmei haaretz hakadosha. Kasher katav harav hamoreh, the Rambam wrote kol. Lachen hiskimu lishloach eleinu, and what's the proof? You felt the need to send us your smicha. Hatuma mi adam al dei shlucham shaliach mitzvah halohu hechacham hamoil kavod harav Shlomo Chazan Yitzu. You sent us an important shaliach with a beautiful stark smicha. L'shenismoch gam anachnu et yadeinu aleha b'chatimat shmotenu, and you want us to put our names. Now you could say, okay, the majority principle works. And we have a mitzvah to follow the majority in every legal decision. And now the Marabach gets to the point. You cannot expect us to accept your decision, even if we disagree with you when we've been cut out of the discussion. The Rambam means that when everybody's discussed it, all the Chachamim, you've got your shiur like you've got your revit, then drinking is a rov. But if you begin ab initio from the very beginning with keeping it to a select group of quality scholars in Tzfat, you've cut me out. I had no say in the discussion. Well, I'm angry, insulted, I'm hurt, and I'm going to put a spoke in the wheel, and you will not get your smicha going. I will do everything I can to stop you, and he did. Sending letters and sending documents here and there. Now I'm just going to go through the last point, so we are in fact in time. Mari Beirav has to deal with the calendar issue. Remember I said that the Marabach will start with the Marabach actually. וכלל דבריו הוא שלקידוש החודש ועיבור השנה, די בגימל סמוכים בדיני קנסות והביא ראיות, וכן כתב בפירוש, וזה לשונו שבטלה הראייה אצלנו, לפי שאין לנו בית דין הראויים לקבל העדות ולקדש, הרי שכל זמן שיחזרו הסנהדרין לדעת הרמב"ם והסמוכים לדעת הרמב"ן, אנו מחויבים לקדש על פי הראייה. This is another major discussion in halakha. If we do establish a Sanhedrin, we're going to have to go back to Kiddush al-Pi Riyah, and we'll in the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem is going to look at the moon and receive witnesses, and it will establish, as we all learned, to Masechet Rosh Hashanah. וכל זמן שהיו הסנהדרין או הסמוכין, אנו מחויבים לקדש על פי הראייה, שלדעת הרמב"ם, הלל לא תיקן אלא לזמן דלקה סנהדרין. הלל נשיאה, who invented the mathematical calculation, was doing it in his own words because there's no Sanhedrin. V'havi hadri Sanhedrin l'duchtayu, Sanhedrin comes back, avagav dalali havi bet dinayu gadol b'chukhma kebet din shel Hillel. Even if it's not as great as the one of Hillel and Nasiah, haynu mechoyavim lekadesh al pi hariyah, gam adat haramban, and also the Ramban would hold that. Okay, so Marabach says you're going to lead us into a terrible crisis. Imagine that. We're going to have to start going back to Kiddush. The calendar, according to witnesses, will come. We can't do that. The land of Israel is overrun. There's persecution. There's poverty. There are taxes. There are non-violent non-Jews all over the place. How are we going to do that? So what did Mari Beirav say? He said, לכן אני אומר לתקן זה הקושי הגדול. שהרב הולך לשיטתו שהוא סובר שנתקבצו כל כך מארץ ישראל. יכולים לקבוע שיום פלוני ראש חודשים ויום פלוני הוא מועד. בוודאי שבעניין כזה אין שום חולק. Marabach says, look, be reasonable. Nobody in all of Israel today would want to go back to making that smicha a smicha for reintroducing making the months and the calendar according to visual evidence regarding the moon. אבל עתה שרבי הלל או בית דינו שהיו סמוכים, תיקנו וקבעו על פיו, אנו קובעים החדשים המועדות, שכיוון שהוא תיקן וקבע בתחילת התקנה, כפי החשבון המקובל, שבשנה פלוני יהיה מקודש, יום פלוני, etc., אבל כאילו הוא בעצמו, כשיגיע אותו היום, אומר, היום זה מקודש, it's all the same, ומה לי אם קידשו בזמנו, וכן כתב הרמב"ן בהשגות שעשה על הרמב"ם. And he has a Ramban on the Rambam who says that the two are equivalent. So, Mari Beirav says they're equivalent, כל זה כתוב בספר יסוד עולם, תרד שעל זה הסכים דת החכמים הזקנים והסתו לנו בחוכמה גדולה, so we don't have to worry, we will continue using the mathematical calendar. And I've written all this because Rav the Marabach wrote in both of his tracts that my suggestion is impractical because we'll have to undo the mathematical calendar. Not at all. We will continue to use it because it now supersedes Kiddush al-Pi Riyah. We've touched a little bit on the Kuntras runs to over 100 pages. Okay, so I've spared you that. I've given you the three main aspects, okay? They're all argued out at great length, but this is where the halakhic issue stands. And what we're going to do next time, we're going to have a look. I'm going to stop the share. I can also stop the recording. So I'm going to do that, right? I'm going to press the stop recording button, and I'm going to say I want to stop recording to the cloud.